I was standing behind the heavy velvet curtains, the dim lights of the empty theater casting long shadows. My eyes caught movement in the darkened corner of the stage. Lucy, my wife and partner for the last 10 years, was in someone's arms. Not just anyone's. Mike, the young, ambitious actor I had personally invited into our company. I felt a knot form in my stomach, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. There was no mistaking what I saw, his lips pressing against hers, her hands pulling him closer. I gripped the edge of the curtain tighter, my nails digging into the fabric. My first instinct was to storm over and rip them apart. But something stopped me. Instead, I watched, cold, calculating, and angry. I wanted to see more, to understand just how deep this betrayal ran. They broke apart, exchanging whispered words and laughter, completely unaware of my presence just a few feet away. I felt sick. The life we had built, our shared success, all of it suddenly seemed like a lie. The theater we loved, the roles we had poured our souls into, everything was tainted by her affair. But I knew one thing, I wasn't going to confront her here. No, this required a different kind of approach. I wasn't just going to watch my world fall apart. I was going to take control of the destruction. Chapter 2, The Plan. That night, lying in our bed, I replayed the scene over and over in my mind. I could hear Lucy breathing next to me, her body relaxed as if nothing was wrong. It sickened me, but my anger wasn't directed solely at her anymore. Mike, he was going to pay for this too. I wasn't going to confront Lucy in some dramatic, emotional outburst. I knew better than that. We were professionals and our world was the theater, where image and reputation meant everything. If Lucy and Mike thought they could betray me without consequences, they were wrong. I would make sure that everything Mike had worked for crumbled before his eyes. And Lucy? She'd watch it all happen. First, I needed information. Every weakness Mike had, every small mistake he made on stage, every backstage comment about his incompetence, I would collect it all. I'd been in this business long enough to know that the real power wasn't in public confrontations, it was in quiet, deliberate strikes. Over the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. I smiled at Lucy, congratulated Mike on his performance, and pretended like everything was normal. Meanwhile, I was gathering ammunition. I spoke to the stage crew, overheard the frustrations of other actors, and noted every small misstep Mike made. The kid was talented, but he was far from perfect. I knew where to hit him. And then, once I had enough, I wrote the article. Under a pseudonym, of course. The first one was subtle, a criticism of Mike's recent performance, pointing out his inexperience and lack of depth as an actor. It was enough to plant the seed of doubt. I knew how this worked. Once the whispers started, they would grow. Lucy had no idea what I was doing. The article dropped like a bomb. Within hours, it had circulated through the theater community, from the producers to the actors, to even the crew. I watched the fallout unfold from behind the scenes, savoring every moment. "Did you see this piece on Mike?" one of the actors muttered during rehearsal, loud enough for me to hear but low enough to feel like gossip. "I mean, he's good, but this writer makes some valid points." I glanced at Mike, pretending to be focused on my script. His jaw tightened as he overheard the chatter. I could see the impact already, his confidence faltered. He was used to being the rising star, the golden boy who could do no wrong. But now, a shadow of doubt had been cast. By the end of the day, the whispers had grown. A few producers started to question whether Mike was right for the lead role in an upcoming production. The theater world thrived on reputation, and once it was damaged, the cracks became impossible to repair. It was the perfect stage for my revenge. Lucy, oblivious to my involvement, began to notice Mike's unease. After rehearsal, I saw her comforting him in the dressing room, her hands on his shoulders, her voice low and soothing. Watching them together ignited the fire in me again, but I held back. This was just the beginning. I had set things in motion, and soon, neither of them would be able to escape the fallout. The second article was more direct. I didn't hold back this time, using every piece of dirt I had collected. I described Mike's flubs during rehearsal, his arrogant attitude toward fellow cast members, and how his performances lacked the maturity and gravitas expected from a lead actor. I made sure to frame it in a way that seemed objective, just another theater critic offering insight, but the damage was clear. This time, the reaction was swift. Mike's phone calls went unanswered by producers. One of the major theaters in the city quietly removed him from the lead role he was slated to perform. He tried to brush it off, but I could see the cracks forming. Lucy, on the other hand, was growing suspicious. She came home later than usual, her face tense and tired. One night, as we sat down for dinner, she finally brought it up. "Have you seen these articles about Mike?" she asked, her voice strained. "It's like someone's targeting him on purpose." I pretended to be surprised, glancing up from my plate. "Really? I hadn't noticed. What do they say?" "They're tearing him apart," she muttered. "Criticizing everything, even things that aren't true." I kept my face neutral, but inside, I was smiling. She was starting to feel the consequences of her actions, and I wasn't even close to being done. "That's how it is in this business," I said, taking a sip of my drink. "One minute you're on top, the next you're yesterday's news." Lucy didn't respond, but I could see the worry etched on her face. She knew that Mike's career was in danger, and by association, hers might be too. The theater world was small, and being linked to someone whose reputation was plummeting could easily bring her down with him. As the days went on, Mike's desperation became more obvious. He was struggling to hold on to any roles, and his confidence on stage was completely shattered. The once cocky, ambitious actor was now unsure of every step, every line he delivered. And Lucy, still unaware that I was behind it all, continued to stand by his side, trying to support him through his downfall. Little did she know, it was only going to get worse. Mike's downfall became inevitable. The whispers turned into loud conversations. And soon, his name was associated with failure and incompetence in every corner of the theater world. Producers who once courted him now avoided him, and the roles he'd secured slipped through his fingers one by one. Lucy came home late again, her face pale and drawn. I sat on the couch, pretending to read a script, but my attention was fixed on her. She poured herself a glass of wine, her hands trembling. I waited, letting the silence between us stretch until she finally spoke. "Mike's losing everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand, how did this happen so fast?" I set down my script, looking at her with feigned concern. "That's how the industry works, Lucy. One bad rumor, and suddenly you're out. He's young, he can recover." She shook her head, taking a long sip of wine. "It's more than that. It's like someone's trying to ruin him on purpose." I almost laughed at the irony. Someone was ruining him, but she'd never suspect it was me. Not yet. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The weight of supporting Mike as his world collapsed. And I could tell she was beginning to feel the consequences of her involvement with him. What Lucy didn't realize was that her reputation was starting to unravel, too. People were beginning to question her judgment. Why would she be so close to an actor whose career was tanking? Why wasn't she distancing herself? The theater world loved gossip, and her loyalty to Mike was starting to raise eyebrows. "Maybe it's time to let go," I suggested, keeping my tone gentle. "You've done everything you can for him." Lucy looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was beginning to realize that her career might be at risk, that standing by Mike wasn't just dangerous for him, but for her as well. She set down her glass and walked away, leaving me alone in the living room. I smiled to myself. The cracks were showing. With Mike's career in freefall, I turned my attention to Lucy. Her involvement with him was too obvious now, and she was beginning to feel the pressure. The next phase of my plan was to bring her down with him. I contacted a few journalists I trusted, anonymous, of course, and fed them a story. Lucy, the star actress, had been involved with Mike for months, and some were starting to wonder if she had helped him get roles he didn't deserve. It wasn't far from the truth, and I knew how easily these rumors could spread. Once the idea was planted, people would connect the dots themselves. The article hit the theater community like a storm. It wasn't a direct attack on Lucy, but it was enough to raise questions. Was her relationship with Mike purely professional? Had she crossed a line to help him? I watched as the fallout began. Lucy started receiving fewer calls for auditions. Directors who had once praised her talents were now cautious, wondering if she was more trouble than she was worth. She wasn't losing roles yet, but the shift in the air was undeniable. One evening, she came home looking more defeated than I'd ever seen her. "They're talking about me now," she said, her voice shaking. "They think I'm involved with Mike, that I've been helping him behind the scenes." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you surprised? You've been close to him for months." "It's not like that," she snapped, her frustration finally surfacing. I was trying to help him. I didn't think it would come back to hurt me." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. You know how this industry works. Once people start talking, it's hard to stop them. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. The cracks were widening, and soon, everything she had worked for would come crashing down. All because she thought she could betray me and get away with it. But the worst was yet to come, and I was ready to watch it all fall apart. Lucy's decline was swift. The theater community, always quick to turn on one of its own, had begun whispering her name with the same disdain they had for Mike. The damage was done, and even if she didn't realize it yet, her reputation was crumbling. One afternoon, as I arrived at the theater for rehearsals, I overheard two of the producers talking. Have you heard about Lucy? People are starting to say she's part of the reason Mike's career is sinking. Yeah, it's a shame. She was brilliant on stage, but I'm not sure I want her name attached to our next production. The satisfaction I felt was almost overwhelming. I kept walking, hiding my smirk, knowing that my plan was coming to fruition. Lucy had no idea how far the damage had spread. But she would soon. That evening, Lucy came home visibly shaken. She dropped her bag by the door and sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling. I didn't need to ask her what had happened, I already knew. I lost a role today, she said quietly, staring at the table. One I was sure I'd get. They said it wasn't because of my acting, but... Her voice trailed off. I sat across from her, feigning concern. But what? They don't want to be associated with any more drama, she said, her voice cracking. They're afraid the gossip about me and Mike will damage their reputation. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. Lucy, you should have seen this coming. You got too close to him. People talk. This is the result. She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. I was just trying to help him, and now I'm losing everything. Her pain should have moved me, but it didn't. This was exactly what I had wanted, to see her realize the weight of her betrayal. Every time she had kissed Mike, every secret meeting, every lie, this was the cost. I warned you, I said, standing up and walking toward the window. You should have let go before it went this far. She didn't respond, just sat there in silence, broken. And I knew I had won. Days turned into weeks, and Lucy's career continued to unravel. Every conversation, every audition seemed to slip away from her grasp. Her name, once associated with brilliance, was now tangled with controversy. She tried to distance herself from Mike, but it was too late. Their affair, once thrilling in its secrecy, had become a noose tightening around her neck. One night, she finally broke. We were sitting in the living room, the air thick with tension. I could sense that something had shifted in her, that the weight of everything had finally pushed her to the edge. I know you're behind this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, raising an eyebrow. Behind what? The articles, the rumors, all of it, she continued. Her eyes filled with a mix of anger and desperation. It's too calculated, too personal. You've been tearing him apart piece by piece, and now it's coming for me. I didn't deny it. There was no point in hiding anymore. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I stared at her. You're right, I said calmly. I did it. Every article, every rumor, every word, it was all me. Lucy recoiled as if I'd struck her. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment, she seemed unable to process my admission. Why? She finally asked, her voice trembling. Why would you do this to me? Because you betrayed me, I said, my voice low and cold. You thought you could carry on with him, right under my nose, and I wouldn't notice? I built this life with you, Lucy. And you threw it away for him. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean to hurt you. I scoffed. But you did. And now, you're paying the price. The room fell silent. Lucy sat there, broken and defeated. While I felt an unexpected hollowness settle over me. The victory I had longed for didn't feel as sweet as I thought it would. There was no sense of triumph, no satisfaction. Just emptiness. I loved you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I still do. I stood up, walking toward the door without looking back. Love doesn't excuse betrayal, Lucy. And with that, I left her there, knowing that everything we had once built together was gone, consumed by the revenge that had destroyed not just her and Mike, but both of us. The days after our confrontation passed in a blur. Lucy and I barely spoke, the house filled with an eerie silence. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of everything falling apart around us. I had gotten what I wanted. Mike was a pariah in the theater world, and Lucy's career was hanging by a thread. But it didn't feel like the victory I had imagined. Lucy spent most of her time in the spare bedroom, rehearsing lines for auditions that never came. I could hear her pacing, murmuring monologues, trying to hold on to the last fragments of her career. But her confidence was shattered, and the casting directors knew it. I watched from a distance, detached, as her life continued to crumble. The articles had done their job. No one wanted to risk hiring her after the rumors about her and Mike spread. The once renowned star of the stage was now tainted, her brilliance overshadowed by scandal. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I heard her come down the stairs. Her footsteps were slow, hesitant. She stood at the doorway, her face pale and drawn, eyes red from crying. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. I looked up from the script I was pretending to read. "Do what?" "This. Pretending like there's anything left of us," she said, her voice breaking. "I've lost everything, Robert. My career, my reputation, you." Her words hit harder than I expected. For all the anger I had carried, for all the plans I had set into motion, hearing her say she'd lost me stirred something deep inside. I had been so focused on revenge that I hadn't considered the wreckage it had left behind. "There's nothing left of us because you destroyed it," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "You and Mike." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I can't live like this anymore, waiting for the next article, the next hit. It's over, Robert." The finality of her words hung in the air between us. For a moment, I thought about telling her I had succeeded. That Mike was completely finished. But what would that change? There was no satisfaction left in her suffering. It had all gone too far. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the house we had once shared, now nothing more than a shell of broken dreams and shattered trust. I thought I'd feel relief when Lucy left. After all, she had been the source of my anger, my betrayal. But in the days that followed her departure, I was left with something unexpected. Emptiness. The house felt too large, too quiet. The quiet no longer brought satisfaction. It echoed with everything I had destroyed. Mike had disappeared from the theater scene entirely. No one wanted to work with him anymore. His name was dragged through the mud by every critic and gossip columnist in town. I had made sure of that. Lucy, too, had faded from the spotlight, her reputation ruined by association. The theater world moved on, as it always did, but I was left standing in the ruins. One night, I found myself walking through the empty theater where Lucy and I had spent years building our careers. The posters of past performances lined the walls, reminders of when we were the golden couple, celebrated and admired. Now, those memories felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the empty seats, I realized how hollow my victory had become. I had destroyed Mike and ruined Lucy's career, but what had I really gained? My life was as empty as the theater before me. A stage with no audience, no purpose. Revenge had consumed me, leaving nothing behind. And now, standing here, I could see it clearly for the first time. I had been so focused on punishing Lucy and Mike that I had destroyed everything that once mattered to me. My career, my marriage, my sense of self. I sat down on the edge of the stage, the weight of it all crashing down on me. I had won, but I had lost more than I could ever have imagined. There was no going back now, no fixing the wreckage I had caused. As I sat there in the darkness, I realized the true cost of my revenge. It hadn't just destroyed Mike or Lucy, it had destroyed me. And now, there was nothing left but the echoes of what once was. I stood up, the emptiness pressing down on me as I made my way out of the theater, leaving behind the last remnants of the life I had once known. The weeks after Lucy left felt like a strange limbo. My routines continued, but they lacked purpose. The theater world, which once felt like the center of my life, had become a place of haunting memories. Every time I walked past the stage where Lucy and I had once performed together, I felt the sting of regret. The roles I still held felt meaningless without her by my side. I tried to push forward, to act as though everything was normal. But the whispers had shifted, now directed at me. People in the theater community weren't as oblivious as I had hoped. The timing of Mike's downfall, the rumors about Lucy, all of it was too precise, too orchestrated. I could see the suspicion in the eyes of my colleagues. One day, after a rehearsal, a director I had worked with for years pulled me aside. "Robert," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "people are starting to talk." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. About you. About Lucy. There are rumors going around that maybe you had something to do with what happened to Mike. And now, with Lucy gone, people are wondering if the whole thing was some sort of revenge? I finished for him, my voice colder than I intended. He nodded. I'm not accusing you of anything. But you know how this business works. People talk. If they start thinking you were behind all of this, well, it could hurt your career. I laughed bitterly. My career? What's left of it, anyway? The director sighed. I'm just saying, Robert, be careful. This industry has a way of turning on people when they least expect it. I thanked him for the warning, but as I left the theater that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. The plan I had executed so flawlessly was starting to unravel. My desire for revenge had blinded me to the consequences, and now, I was becoming a target of the same whispers that had destroyed Lucy and Mike. The worst part was, I had no one left to blame but myself. As the months dragged on, I found myself more isolated than ever. The theater roles that once came so easily now seemed out of reach. People were cautious around me as if my reputation had been tainted by the very rumors I had used to destroy Mike. Lucy had disappeared from my life entirely. I didn't know where she had gone, and part of me didn't want to know. The sight of her empty closet, the space she had once filled, was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. I had chased her away, ruined her career, and destroyed the love we once shared, all for a fleeting sense of vengeance. One evening, after another day of endless rehearsals for a part one no longer cared about, I found myself sitting at the old bar Lucy and I used to visit after performances. The memories of those nights came flooding back, our laughter, the excitement of opening nights, the dreams we had built together. I ordered a drink and sat in silence, replaying every moment of the last year in my head. How had I gotten here? How had my life, once filled with promise and love, turned into this? I had destroyed everything I cared about, and for what? A moment of satisfaction that had long since faded. As I stared into my glass, I realized the truth I had been avoiding for so long. Revenge had consumed me. It had taken over every part of my life, driving me to destroy the very things that made me happy. In my quest to hurt Lucy, I had hurt myself far more. The theater world had moved on without me. New faces and new talents filled the roles that once belonged to me and Lucy. The world we had built together was gone, replaced by something colder, emptier. And I was left alone, with nothing but my own regrets. I left the bar that night knowing that there was no going back. The damage was done, and I had no one to blame but myself. Revenge had given me nothing but ruin, and in the end, it had taken everything. As I walked through the empty streets, the reality of my actions settled in. I had spent so much time trying to punish Lucy for her betrayal that I had never stopped to ask myself if it was worth it. Now, with everything lost, the answer was painfully clear. It wasn't. And as I disappeared into the shadows of the city, I knew that I would carry the weight of that realization for the rest of my life. Months passed, and I found myself more alone than ever. The theater world had fully turned its back on me. Producers stopped returning my calls, roles that would have been mine were now being offered to younger actors, and the invitations to industry events had all but dried up. My name was still whispered in the corridors of theaters, but not in the way it once had been. Now, it was with suspicion, with disdain. I had become the villain in my own story, and everyone knew it. One rainy afternoon, I decided to confront the full extent of the damage. I sat in my office, scrolling through the online articles about Mike's downfall and Lucy's disappearance from the stage. Her name had all but vanished from the headlines, and Mike had left the city, or at least that's what the last bit of gossip suggested. But as I clicked through the articles, I stumbled upon something that stopped me cold. A headline, Lucy Carson to make quiet return to the stage, new project, new start. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the words. She was coming back. After everything I had done after her career had been dragged through the mud, she was making a quiet return to the theater, far away from our city, far away from me. I read the article in full. It mentioned her new project with a small, independent theater group in another state. It was a minor role, nothing compared to the leading parts she had once dominated, but it was a start. She had found a way to rebuild, while I was left standing in the ruins of my own creation. Part of me wanted to be angry. She had betrayed me, after all. But as I sat there, staring at the article, the anger never came. Instead, I felt something else, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. Guilt. I had been so consumed by revenge that I had forgotten the person I was hurting the most wasn't just Mike. It was Lucy. She had made a mistake, but so had I, and my mistake had been far more destructive. I clicked out of the article, closed the laptop, and sat in silence. I had won, but at what cost? I had destroyed her career and sabotaged her life, all to satisfy my own need for vengeance. And now, she was finding a way to start over, while I was still trapped in the web of consequences I had spun for myself. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I had become the very thing I had despised in her, a destroyer. And there was no undoing what I had done. No amount of apologies or explanations could fix the damage I had caused. The rain outside grew heavier, the steady rhythm pounding against the window. I stared out at the gray sky, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. Lucy had a chance to rebuild, but I didn't. The theater world wouldn't forget, and neither would I. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. Alone. The rain had long since stopped by the time I decided to leave the house. I needed air, needed to escape the suffocating silence that had taken over my life. The streets were slick with water, the city glistening under the dim light of street lamps. As I walked, I couldn't stop thinking about the article, about Lucy finding her way back into the world of theater. I wondered what she would say if she saw me now, the man who had ruined her life, walking aimlessly through the streets like a ghost of the past. Would she feel pity for me, or would she be relieved to know that I was suffering the consequences of my own actions? Perhaps she wouldn't care at all. I found myself standing in front of a small, independent theater, the kind of place Lucy would have started over in. The marquee was blank, the entrance quiet. It was a far cry from the grand theaters we once performed in together, but there was a certain charm to it. It felt intimate and honest. I peered through the glass doors, seeing the empty stage inside, the chairs lined up neatly in rows. For a moment, I imagined Lucy there, rehearsing lines, trying to rebuild what I had torn apart. The thought made my chest tighten. She was moving on, finding a way forward, while I was still rooted in the past. I had thought revenge would free me, that it would give me some sense of closure, but it hadn't. It had only bound me tighter to my pain. I stepped back from the door, turning away from the theater. I didn't belong there, not anymore. The world of theater had moved on without me, just as Lucy had. And I was left with nothing but the echoes of what once was. As I walked back home, my mind drifted to all the things I could have done differently. I could have confronted Lucy in a way that didn't destroy everything. I could have tried to understand, to forgive, instead of letting my anger consume me. But it was too late for that now. The damage was done, and there was no going back. When I arrived home, the house felt colder than before. The emptiness was suffocating, and for the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of my loneliness. I had driven Lucy away, and in doing so, I had driven away any chance of happiness for myself. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I stared at the blank notepad in front of me. I used to write my lines here, preparing for roles that excited me, and that gave my life meaning. Now, the page remained empty, much like my life. I picked up the pen, hesitated, then put it down again. What was the point? The theater world had no place for me anymore. No one wanted to work with someone whose name had become synonymous with scandal. My career, like my marriage, was over. I sat there in the silence, the reality of my situation settling in. I had gotten what I wanted, revenge. But in the process, I had lost everything that had ever mattered to me. And now, I was left with nothing but the hollow satisfaction of having ruined two lives, Mike's and Lucy's. And my own. As I sat there, the weight of the consequences pressing down on me, I realized that there was no one left to blame. Not Lucy, not Mike, only me. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with them. Alone. The house remained silent, the world outside carrying on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. And as I sat in the empty kitchen, I finally understood the true cost of revenge. It had taken everything. The weeks stretched on in the same quiet rhythm, each day bleeding into the next until I could no longer tell them apart. I had stopped reaching out to old friends. Most of them had long since distanced themselves from me, and I no longer scrolled through theater reviews or entertainment news. My mornings were filled with silence, the afternoons hollow, and the evenings, once filled with the vibrant energy of rehearsals and performances, now stretched into an emptiness I couldn't escape. One evening, as I stood at the window of my apartment, Looking out over the city skyline, a thought struck me. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over the buildings, the kind of light that always used to make me feel like there were infinite possibilities just beyond the horizon. But now, that horizon seemed so far away. My life felt distant, as though I was watching someone else's story unfold while mine had come to a grinding halt. I thought about Lucy. I thought about her every day. If I'm honest, though, I tried not to dwell too long on the memories. It hurt too much. I used to tell myself that I had been justified in what I did, that she deserved to suffer after what she put me through. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the full story. It was never that simple. That night, staring out into the fading daylight, something inside me shifted. A question rose up, uninvited and unwelcome, but persistent. What if I apologized? At first, I dismissed the thought. What good would it do? I asked myself. It wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. I had destroyed Mike's career, driven Lucy away from the life we'd built together, and torched every bridge I could in the process. But the question lingered, gnawing at me. Maybe an apology wouldn't change the past, but could it change something inside me? Could it help me finally let go of the bitterness that had been eating me alive for months? I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept circling back to the idea, running through scenarios. Imagining her reaction. Would she laugh? Tear the letter up without reading it? Or maybe, just maybe, it would give her some peace too. I didn't know, but by morning, I had made my decision. I was going to reach out to her, not to explain myself, not to seek forgiveness, but to say sorry. I owed her that much. The next few days were filled with quiet contemplation as I crafted the letter in my head. I had to keep it short and simple. Lucy didn't need a long-winded explanation, nor would she want one. She had moved on, after all. I knew from a few theater contacts that she was working with a small independent group now, rebuilding her career far from the limelight. She had found a way forward, while I was still stuck in the wreckage of what I had done. Finally, one rainy afternoon, I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and paper. For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me. But then, I began to write. Lucy, I've thought about what I did every day since you left. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not just for exposing Mike, but for everything, for letting my anger destroy what we had. I know I can't undo the past, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I regret it all. I hope you're finding happiness. Robert. I stared at the words for a long time, wondering if they were enough. But what more could I say? There was no fixing the past, no undoing the choices we both made. This was all I had left to offer. Folding the letter, I placed it in an envelope and addressed it to the small theater company where she was performing. I didn't expect her to reply. In fact, I wasn't even sure she'd read it. But that didn't matter. This wasn't for her, it was for me. I needed to let go of the hatred that had consumed me, the need for revenge that had ultimately destroyed everything I held dear. Dropping the letter into the mailbox, I felt an odd sense of release, like a heavy weight had been lifted from my chest. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could move on too. 2 weeks later, I came home to find an envelope waiting for me. The sight of it stopped me in my tracks. It was Lucy's handwriting on the front. My heart pounded as I ripped it open, unsure of what I would find inside. Her letter was brief, just a few lines, but they hit me like a tidal wave. Robert, thank you for your letter. It took me a long time to process everything that happened between us. And I can't say I've forgiven you. But I understand why you did what you did. We both made mistakes. I hope you can find peace. I'm trying to do the same. Lucy. I read the letter again, slowly, letting each word sink in. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness, nor was it an invitation for reconciliation. But it was something. It was understanding, and in a way,